Agreement with Kyiv for American access to Ukraine's mineral resources worth hundreds of billions of dollars. But what do the Ukrainians get in return? That seems unclear tonight, with President Zelensky saying the agreement doesn't include security guarantees.
What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now.
I want to point out the Patriot air defense missile system, which currently acts as a big shield around major cities like Kyiv right now. These cities are under siege. They're getting hit by Russian drones and missiles every single day. Things you're hearing about that are correct, though they are exaggerated, the scale of devastation. And in some places, a lot of places, Kyiv, for example, in Kharkiv, life goes on to a great extent because of something like Patriot.
Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky speaking out after a massive Russian attack on Ukraine. Officials say Russia launched more than 260 drones hitting energy and gas infrastructure targets. And Mick, President Trump's decision to pause military aid and intelligence sharing has raised concerns that Ukraine's air defenses will be less effective. What kind of an impact could that have?
That's right, Diane. That's one of the first things they're concerned about running out. That and the 105 millimeter artillery shells, or what is expected to start running out in May. And of course, part of intelligence is offensive, but part of it is defensive. So,
if I may, President Putin is bombing Ukraine.
Yeah.
Do you still believe him when he tells you that he wants peace?
Yeah, no, I believe him. I believe him. I think we're doing very well with Russia. But right now they're bombing the hell out of Ukraine. I'm finding it more difficult, frankly, to deal with Ukraine. And they don't have the cards. They don't have the cards.
Had an initial engagement with the Russians. The Ukrainians had a great opportunity to bind our economies together through that mineral deal. Unfortunately, that didn't go so well, but we think we're going to get things back on track. Secretary Rubio, myself and Ukrainian delegation will be meeting in Saudi Arabia next week to get these talks back on track, get a ceasefire in place, and drive peace home.
We got to stop. They're losing on average 2,000 soldiers a week. That's a lot of soldiers. Do you agree, Peter?
It's a lot of soldiers on both sides. I agree. Do you, Mr. President, think that Vladimir Putin is taking advantage of the U.S. pause right now on intelligence and military aid to Ukraine?
No, I actually think he's doing what anybody else would do. I think he wants to get it stopped and settled, and I think he's hitting them harder than he's been hitting them.
Well, here we go. So Trump has decided to no longer send money to Ukraine and share intelligence. So what I'm gathering here with this breaking news is we stopped sharing the intelligence. So therefore, Russia has bombed Ukraine. And perhaps if we would have warned Ukraine about this impending strike, they could have protected themselves. That's what I'm getting from this.
And you're absolutely correct. One, in being ex-military and being in the Signal Corps, the communication wing of the Army, the moment that intelligence and or communication is disrupted, you're done. You're done. You have no eyes, you have no ears.
Yeah.
And so therefore, what's happening to them right now, they've got blinders on. They have no idea from what direction any missiles will come in and literally begin to wipe them out. And see, so that was a bad move. It was a bad move literally on both of their behalves. You know, again, they should have sat down, again, like grown men, and had a conversation, not in front of the news media, but they should have had a conversation where they could literally just sit down and work their way through this. Stop publicizing stuff, because you're trying to literally put people on the spot. That's what you're trying to do. Yeah. But sis, again, think about it like this. If you remember, there was a time, what was it, about 5-10 years ago, where all of the communication went down, all the cell phone towers, everything got locked up. and nobody could communicate. Man, that was a nightmare on Elm Street. People worried about their loved ones because, once again, you never know what's going to happen. The moment communication is down, you're done. And so therefore, that's why we must do everything we can to make sure that we're in a position where we can communicate. And again, listen to this. No more warnings for Ukraine. Can we ask you a question? What happens if God stops talking to you? What happens if God stops talking to me? I'm in trouble. Because the thing is, when he stops talking to you and I verbally, you know what he does? Ask the prodigal son. What ask the prodigal son? He can tell you in Luke chapter 15, what does God do when he stops talking to you vertically? He brings life to the end of oneself. That's what he does. Everything started falling apart for him. Nobody wanted to help him. He ran out of money. He had no place to lay his head. He had no food to eat. And see, God brought him to the end of himself. When God stops talking, somebody's in trouble.
Yeah, so we have to learn, talking about warnings, the Holy Spirit warns us of everything. So we cannot disregard any warnings from God. That's for sure. I want him to keep warning me, and it could be something like somebody that you meet and you have a check in your spirit. It's like, I don't quite understand why I'm not 100% sold on this person. Because the Lord knows that the person has a hidden agenda or an ulterior motive. So, yeah, we're not giving Ukraine any more warnings, but I pray that the Lord continues to warn me about different things.
There you go. I mean, especially when we can't control that, but there's other things, like you said, our life and our lifestyles, that there is a greater measure of control. But Tracy, can I ask this question? What happens when you sit down at the table and somebody has something that you need, and you're going to let your pride and your arrogance strip you from getting what you stand in need of? They've got the upper hand. Acknowledge it. And if they have the upper hand, then try to work your way around that scenario. Because again, they got the keys to the car. He kept saying, you don't have any cards. Well, how do I get the cards? How do I put myself in a position where I can play this game with you and then benefit from it? Because the way for them to allow to have happened what happened, that's devastating. Because now innocent lives have died. And I hate to say, but here's the reality of it, Tracy. The blood of those individuals that died are upon his hands.